On October 31, 2000, at 11:17 in the evening, a Boeing 747 carrying 179 people lined up for takeoff on the wrong runway. What happened in the next 33 seconds killed 83 of them and ended 28 years without a fatal crash for Singapore Airlines. This is the story of Flight 06 and the perfect storm of confusion, darkness, and missed checks that turned an experienced crew into a tragedy. The flight had originated in Singapore that morning, bound for Los Angeles. The aircraft was a veteran, delivered in January 1997. It had flown nearly 18,500 hours with an outstanding maintenance record. The captain was Foong Chi Kong, 41, with more than 11,200 hours in his logbook. His first officer, Latif Serrano, had 2,400 hours. Both men were rested, prepared, and considered skilled pilots. But they were about to make a mistake that no amount of experience could prevent once the chain of events began. Taipei was in the grip of Typhoon Zhangxing. Visibility had dropped to 450 meters. Wind was gusting to 50 knots. Air traffic control cleared Flight 006 for takeoff from runway 05 left. But there was a problem no one in the cockpit knew about yet. Runway 05 right had been closed for construction since September. The pavement between two taxiways was torn up. Concrete barriers, excavators, bulldozers, and piles of steel reinforcement sat abandoned on the surface, waiting for dawn to resume work. The runway closure had been issued in a NOTAM, a notice to airmen, back in August. The crew had this information available. They simply never reviewed it. As the 747 pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway system, the cockpit was a hub of routine activity. Checklists were run, procedures were followed. But one procedure was not in Singapore Airlines' manual that night, confirming which runway was actually active before takeoff. The aircraft moved onto taxiway NP, which ran parallel to both runways. The pilots received wind and clearance information. Everything sounded normal. Everything felt normal. But as they approached the end of the taxiway system, they made a critical turn, not onto runway 05 left as instructed, but instead turned right in what amounted to a U-turn onto runway 05 right. The closed runway, the runway full of construction equipment. They never checked their displays to confirm. They never reviewed the taxi route they had just flown. At 11:66 p.m., the 747 advanced its throttles and began its takeoff roll. The nose lifted, the engines roared. For 33 seconds, the aircraft accelerated down what the pilots believed was an active runway. The nose gear and main wheels hit something hard as the aircraft accelerated down the runway in the typhoon wind. Concrete barriers. The aircraft struck an excavator, then another, a vibrating roller, a bulldozer, an air compressor cart. Tons of steel rebar piled on the pavement. The 747, a machine designed to fly, was being torn apart on the ground. The aircraft broke into 3 sections. The fuselage fractured, hydraulic systems ruptured, fuel lines severed and ignited. A massive fire erupted in the main deck mid-cabin. In that section, many of the passengers perished in the flames. The front of the aircraft, where the cockpit was located, remained largely intact. All 3 pilots survived the impact. The captain and relief pilot walked away uninjured. The first officer suffered minor injuries. But around them, people who had been secure in their seats moments before were now trapped in darkness and fire. 96 people survived the crash. 79 passengers and 4 cabin crew died in the initial impact and fire. 2 more passengers died in hospital hours later, bringing the final death toll to 83. In the survivable sections of the aircraft, passengers and crew were pulled from the wreckage by emergency teams. Many had severe burns. Others had fractures and injuries from the deceleration. The survivors were scattered across rescue helicopters and ambulances, rushed into the Taipei night. But for 83 souls, the flight to Los Angeles would never be completed. The Taiwan Aviation Safety Council opened an investigation. 18 months of work followed: interviews, data analysis, reconstruction of the final moments. On April 24, 2002, the official report was released. The conclusion was unambiguous. The flight crew did not review the taxi route, despite having all relevant charts available. They failed to check the primary flight display and paravisual display, which would have shown them they were lined up on the wrong runway. They had neglected to confirm the active runway before takeoff, a procedure that did not exist in Singapore Airlines' manual at the time. The report concluded that inadequate situational awareness was the probable cause, but the investigation exposed more than crew error. Singapore's Ministry of Transport issued a dissent, arguing that the report was incomplete. They pointed to systemic failures. The runway 05 right edge lights were most likely not illuminated that night. Airport lighting and signage did not meet international standards. Other pilots reported nearly making the same mistake. One crew had turned early onto the wrong runway just the day before. The finger pointed at airport design, at procedures, at the entire system that allowed confusion to happen. Change followed. Runway 05 right was decommissioned and reopened as a taxiway. Centerline markings were repainted. Lighting was upgraded. Runway closure signs were reinforced. Airlines worldwide revised their procedures to mandate runway confirmation checks before every takeoff. Singapore Airlines updated its operations manual. Captain Fung and First Officer Cyrano were fired in 2002 and faced conditionally suspended manslaughter charges. The accident ended 28 years of Singapore Airlines' perfect safety record and became a cornerstone case in runway incursion prevention. 83 people died in the darkness that night, but their loss forced aviation to look harder at the systems meant to keep us safe.